Welcome to this week's episode of Inside Property Development, where we're speaking with Philip Barnes. Thanks for coming, Philip.
My pleasure. Absolutely my pleasure, Paul.
I usually ask everyone to give us a little CV, really, right from the beginning in terms of where you started.
Yeah, no, I did a town and country planning degree at Manchester University, did a couple of years in a city council, local planning authority, essentially then 20 years in consultancy, ended up leading the Newcastle office of Nathaniel Litchfield and Partners, now Litchfields, and being their national head on housing. As a result of that, got to know Barratt quite well, then moved to Barratt as their UK Group Land and Planning Director, had 12 absolutely fantastic years there, loved every minute of it, and then retired from there, and I'm now doing a part-time role for Savills, and I have a part-time role for a small SME developer in the northeast. So there you go, 2 minutes part of history, Paul.
Obviously, I'm ex-Barratt's as well, many years ago, and also, an SME developer both before Barratt's and after Barratt's, and obviously now you're getting much more involved in that world. So I'm particularly keen to talk about just how different it is, really, because perhaps people on the outside that don't know, whether it be maybe some planners and policymakers and stuff like that, they just look at it as property development or house building, but things are different depending on how big you are and what you can do.
Yeah, I mean, they're different in many ways. If I had to highlight what, I would say it's the economies of scale that Barratt could deploy in terms of buying its key materials, whether that be consultancy services, or whether that be bricks or blocks or steel or roof tiles. They're able to buy those things for very much lower prices than me and my mate in Gosford Estates can buy them for, put it that way.
Absolutely. But not only that, I'll tell you something else that I think is really, really important that, again, perhaps planners and policymakers don't know or think about too much is let's just talk about, funny enough, actually, I was talking to an ex-Barratt's land director just yesterday about this, abortive costs. So, every site we look at, whether you're big or small, doesn't come off. Now, I remember when I was at Barratt's 25 years ago, my region, we had a £1 million a year abortive land budget. Yeah. We knew, surveys, research, just stuff, looking at sites that we knew probably wouldn't come off, because they don't all come off for various reasons. Yeah. So we had a £1 million abortive land budget for just really looking at deals. Yeah. Now, that same region, obviously, it would be a lot more nowadays. If you're a little guy, you can't afford to be spending fortunes on potential deals that don't go anywhere. So that alone is massive. And I think the delays and complexities in the planning system in particular, people don't realise just how damaging that is. I think they might think, 6 months to get a pre-app response, 2 years to get planning. Yes, they realise it's a long time, but I don't think they actually realise how damaging that is to SMEs, even in terms of like deals. Sometimes, landowners don't want to be tied up for, 2 years and things like that. That's a major difference between the big developers and little ones. They don't want to have to deal with all of that, those costs and delays either, but they are more able to because they're so big.
Yeah, no, Paul, couldn't agree more. I'll just two points. One from a built hot volume guy, one from an SME perspective. For the volume guys, I do think there's that issue of abortive costs has a real operational issue in the planning system, because you hear about excessive developer margins and viability. We've got to capture more money from developers. And actually, I think there's a misconception that the margin that would be shown in a scheme viability assessment, I think there's a misconception that that margin purely and simply covers the risks and potential abortives on that project. It doesn't. It has to cover it has to cover all the losses and abortives that developer will do across the piece. And as you said, it's a lot more than £1 million. I know from my part, it's a lot more than £1 million a year now that has to be spent on schemes that don't go anywhere. Barratt probably have a 1 in 4 hit rate. That's it when bidding. All those other 3 bids that we don't end up building on have to be funded by the schemes that we did build on. So I think there's a real operational impact of that misunderstanding, Paul. And then the other thing I would say from the SME perspective, and I know this because I've got a friend who's just had to wind up. It's a really good local house building business in the Northeast. If you're working on a set margin and something like nitrate neutrality comes in and delays you, you've only got 2 or 3 schemes and you're delayed for 2 years on 2 of them, you go bust. Whatever. I mean, Barratt, Taylor Wimpey, Persimmon, big, strong businesses, they can absorb a lot of shocks. A lot have come onto the level of shocks they're facing at the moment. But a small builder can't. Something like, as I say, nitrate neutrality or building safety levy, if you're in London doing a couple of schemes, you'd put you out of business.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not a threat. It's happening day after day. A really good friend of mine, really good guy with a really good business, and he's had to put on LinkedIn, apologies, he's got under.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And likewise, I've got mates and stuff that exactly the same things happen, and or it just gets too painful and they give up in the end. They think it's very interesting. Actually, I was talking to someone about this the other day. I've been doing this for 40 years now, and I was saying to them, you can only get kicked in the nuts for so long before you start not liking it anymore.
Absolutely, it's tough times for SMEs. But I'm not here to plead the case for volume house builders, but I just did a little bit of playing around recently, and there's a lot of talk at the moment about. The House of Commons Select Committee report was published last week, and there seems to be an inference there that there is still a pot of money that hasn't been taken, either from landowners or developer margins. Yeah, if you look at the top 5, if you look at gross margin, look at the top 5 FTSE businesses, which are a mixture of banks, pharma, and oil. They're on average 55% gross margin. Whereas if you do the same figure for a house builder, it's 20% gross margin. And when you do the net margin, the only one that matters when you're paying the bills, you've got house builders there at around about 10% margin, some of them. And that's not a good place to be in if you want to run a sustainable long-term business.
100%. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because we won't get too much onto land value capture. This is all linked to the sort of story or the belief that developers that just make massive money, and I think they think it's easy, i.e. people that from on the outside, and that we're all making fortunes, which absolutely is not the case. And you've only got to look at 2 things really. Obviously, the massive decline in SME developers since 1988, and it continues. Now, if it was as easy and as lucrative as some people would like to believe, then that chart would everyone would be diving in, and it would be going the other way. So that's one thing to mention. And the other thing to mention, and I'm not sure if people quite understand why there has been so much consolidation within the house building industry, and I've literally seen it myself. Just as one example, I was at Lang Homes 30 years ago. Fantastic developer. I loved my time there. They were really, really good. Of course, they got merged with Wimpey. Wimpey then some years later got bought out or merged with Taylor Woodrow, became Taylor Wimpey. Barratt, 2007, obviously after my time, but bought David Wilson, and now obviously more recently Barratt Redrow. And I think, I don't know why people on the outside think that's happened. Well, you tell us why it's happened.
Why the SMEs have gone down?
Well. Actually, I suppose there was two questions there. Well, yeah, go on. You tell me what you think of the SMEs, and then we'll do the what's happened with the big boys as well.
I mean, this explosion of regulation is difficult for an SME. I mean, if you're a small family business, there might be 4 or 5 of you, and you've got to understand and then commission and then review and then process and then submit 20, 30 reports to do a scheme of 5, 10, 15, 20 houses. It can get to a point, as I've seen with a friend of mine, it just becomes too much. And that regulation, when it has a cost to it, and when that regulation is allied to significant build cost increases, which we've seen over the last 5 years, way in excess of house price inflation, revenue increases, you're just squeezing the profits down to a point where, for a small developer, it's not viable anymore. It's not viable anymore either on a site that you bought and you're trying to build out and you're not getting the revenues you'd hope for in a falling market, and that's causing you real operational financial problems. Or it's not viable to bid for sites, because when you put it in the appraisal and you're looking for that big, thick cover to help you through bad times and good, it just isn't there. So you just can't take the risk to bid. And to be honest, that choice is often taken out of your hands, because the bank will say, I've done my own appraisal and it's too risky. And for SME, no bank funding for what is a hugely capital intensive and upfront funded activity. No bank funding, it means no business for SMEs generally.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you something else that happens that doesn't really get talked about very much, but I'm going to be talking about a lot about it in an episode coming up in the not too distant future, is banks actually pulling the plugs on smaller developers and basically putting them under, because when you've got the original term of your loan, when you go over that because stuff isn't selling, or then of course stuff isn't selling at what you hoped it was going to sell, there's a lot of banks actually, and a couple in particular that I'm going to name, but I'm not going to name them just yet, that are doing a bit of an RBS, whereby they're effectively, I'm not sure whether you're familiar with loan to own, but there are some banks and funders. You wouldn't have seen this at Barratt's, obviously, because it's a whole different world in terms of the way they're funding. But for smaller developers, there are banks that their whole model is lend on stuff that they think might go wrong, or they know the deals are tight, and they put developers under pressure. The second you go past the term of your loan, you've got penalty interest, you've got all sorts of additional costs and fees and stuff like that. And basically, if there was any equity left in the deal, they basically have it. They appoint receivers, and then that's another deal or another developer wiped out. Now that's been happening increasingly, but most developers don't talk about it, because it's not a good look, and they don't want to get a punch up with a bank. So that's something that happens that doesn't get talked about very much. Anyway, but other than that, absolutely, planning has just got way too expensive and complex. A problem for the little guys, and it's also a problem for the big guys, which is of course why they've been forced to merge.
For the big guys, I'd hesitate to say it's all about one particular thing. Builders do 3 things: they buy land and get planning, they build houses, and they sell them. And there's huge risk and complexity on all those 3 things. But on the land side, if you've invested many, many millions of pounds because you've seen this opportunity in MPPF, and you're submitting many tens of planning applications throughout the country, if you're not getting the consents out the other side, that's a major problem for your business and your shareholders. And I think whether you're a volume guy or a smaller guy, I think probably an accurate perception in good market times is, as long as you buy the land right, you should be okay. You can absorb a few knocks in the road. You might get a bit of revenue growth, and you should be okay. And you can survive. You wipe your bloody nose and go on to the next scheme. But at the moment, and I'm probably putting my Savills landowner hat on, most of our clients are landowners. The cost increases, plus the flatly falling revenues, mean that the only flex is the land price. But that idea of buying well, for landowners, it's often their only asset. It's often income generating. If they sell it, it's a once in a lifetime, and they'll pay a huge amount of stamp duty land tax. It's unless there's a lot in it for the landowner, they simply will not sell their land. What the house builder might say, sell it for this, and then I'm buying it. Well, it's just not make any sense for the landowners. Now, there are two operational impacts of that, I would say. One is for the supply of land as a whole. If landowners aren't going to sell because the metrics aren't right for them, probably a bigger problem in the north and the Midlands than the south, maybe. But also, the other operational impact is this view that we can just abolish hope value, and we can buy land from landowners at low values, and they'll, and that's fine. It actually isn't fine. It's incredibly difficult to buy land by a compulsory purchase. The case law on whether you can buy land that's draft allocated and assume there's no hope value over existing use value is very uncertain, particularly with regards to the Human Rights Act and your right to the peaceful enjoyment of your own possessions. So I think this, if I'm going to speak up for landowners as well, this idea there's a great big pot of cream called the land value, I'm just not sure that's right in this market. I think the approach to viability assessment, which has been going to be reviewed over the next sort of 6-8 weeks, 3 months. We're going to have to watch that closely, because we could end up, I don't want any change. I don't want major changes to the changes brought in 2018. They're starting to bed in. Until this market downturn, we're starting to work. I don't like it when I read reports saying we're going to upturn the system, a whole new approach to capture more land value. I don't think it's there. And I think the disruption would dramatically reduce the supply of new homes for families who are in desperate need of them. Yeah. That's a bit of a ramble, but I hope you don't.
It's good. You're absolutely right. And again, it's one of the reasons for doing this podcast, to get that sort of message out there, because when people don't understand how it really works, i.e. particularly planners and policymakers, they think that there's a bottomless pit of money in terms of clawing it off of developers' profit and clawing it off of landowners. And what's happened as costs have increased and everything else has got increasingly complex, stuff has got less and less and less viable, to the point whereby already you've got to look at things as they are. Volumes that are down, developers big and small are not building, and they're not building because they don't want to. Our whole business is about we make money by building and selling stuff. That's what we want to do. So the fact that we're not doing it, it's because of the system, it's because of the costs. It's because of the complexities. So, doing anything that's going to add to that, thinking that there's a load more in the pot, just isn't the case, actually. And I think it's really important that, people realise that we're not lying when we talk about how difficult and unviable things are,
You and I live and breathe land. And, when someone says land value, we automatically go, well, what do you mean, net or gross? Do you mean greenfield or serviced? There's four different types of land value and the permutations thereof. And yet you read some of these reports, you think, do they really understand the nuances of how different types of land is valued at different stages of the process? I mean, I can only really speak for Barratt. I haven't worked for any other volume house builders. They want to build homes. That's how they generate their turnover. That's how they generate their profit. And Barratt, certainly when I was there, and I know it's still the fact, I was hugely committed to growth. And it's hugely welcoming of the planning changes that the government has brought in. And it has a plan for growth, and it will deliver it. So we mustn't be. I'm not going to be too negative about the prospects for volume house builders, because my experience at Barratt is they're a fantastic business who understand how to overcome barriers. But it won't be. It's way tougher than it was, and you've seen that perhaps maybe reflected in their share price over the last 5 years or so. And the idea that the planning system is regarding Barratt as it was in 2006 is not right. If you want Barratt to grow, you've got to give it the conditions to grow. The government's doing a fantastic job on planning, but I do think whether you're SME or volume house builder, we've got to address this situation where for the first time in 70 years, first-time buyers don't have any support to buy a home. But arguably the most difficult period ever, maybe not after GFC, maybe, to buy a home. But if you support all good, brilliant businesses, whether SME or volume house builders, with meaningful, high-impact schemes, they will grow. As you said, they want to build houses and they will grow.
I think that's absolutely right. So, fair play to the government in terms of planning changes. The grey belt being a big one, but other stuff as well. They've changed a lot and are proposing to change a lot quickly. So I actually think they've done a lot of good stuff. There are obviously more fundamental problems with the system, the resourcing of planning departments obviously being a big one, and of course just pure economics in terms of getting stuff to stack. Most importantly, probably in a lot of ways, the fact that we can't build stuff if we're not going to sell it. So it'd be very interesting to see what comes out in the budget. But absolutely something has got to be done to help on the demand side, hasn't it?
And I know for a fact that's the house view within Barratt when I was there, and I'm sure it still is. And since I've moved to Savills, I've only been there a month. Just reading something this morning, that's the house view in Savills. And everything you read at the moment, whether it's Litchfield, whether it's Neil Hudson, whether it's Knight Frank, whether it's, just every day you seem to be reading something that we need some demand side support. An equity loan scheme seems to be the best that had a massive impact by Help to Buy previously. So just really hope the government is listening. I'm not 100% sure we will get it in the budget. I have no idea, by the way. There is a need for some demand side support. The brilliant planning fund, good stuff about London a couple of weeks ago, which is that is a problem. But it's got to be backed up with some demand, some meaning, an equity loan scheme to cut to the chase.
Right, just a quick one. Whether you are a massively experienced and well-established property developer already, or maybe you're a new or aspiring one, either way, you will know that it is really not easy to find viable opportunities to come up with the best scheme, the best design that's going to maximise the land value and fully de-risk things for you, and then to go on to get the very best planning permissions as quickly as possible. However experienced you are, you will know that that is not an easy thing. I have put together a super detailed scorecard based on my 40 years experience in this industry, reverse engineering everything that I've learned, including lots and lots of mistakes over the years, and everything I've done to maintain, touch wood, 100% planning track record. I'm pretty sure there will be stuff that you don't know. Go and do that scorecard. Find out just how good or not your current process is, and I absolutely guarantee you will learn at least a little something, if not a ton. So it's bit.ly/MLA score, all in capitals. You can do the Millbank Land Academy scorecard. I absolutely guarantee you will find some interesting stuff, and it will help you get much better deals. I've got to tell you, it'd be very interesting to see what does happen with London. Personally, actually, without that demand side help, even 20%, fast track viability, I don't think it's enough. Actually, I don't think. And don't get me wrong, I'm super pro affordable housing. I've talked about it many times. I grew up in a council house. I'd be putting 50% affordable everywhere if I could. But the way things have gone, it's just so unviable without massive subsidy in terms of, to support particularly social housing, even reducing the affordable housing requirement to 20% in London. I've got to tell you, I don't think that's going to improve things as much as is hoped,
Yeah, look, we're going to have to see. I mean, they've done other stuff as well, haven't they, around SIL and bits and bobs. Yeah, I think you're not alone in thinking 20% still sounds a challenge in a market that has fallen 70, 80% in a year. I'm really impressed with Steve Reed. I was gutted when Angela Rayner left because I thought she was great in that job. But the way Steve Reed's attacking the problem is pretty impressive, I think. And he's got this thing done in London, and the politics of that would have been difficult, I suspect. But he's got it done, and I think from what I've seen, he's the kind of bloke who'll look, and if it isn't working, he'll go back for more. Sometimes you have to eat an elephant in a number of bites rather than one gulp, don't you?
Talking about big, legal changes, for example, we'll come on to the planning and infrastructure bill, actually. But just before that, as I've got a ex-major house building person on, another myth I wouldn't mind busting is there are people out there that think that the major house builders operate in some sort of cartel where they are, divvying up all the deals, trying to restrict land supply. Don't even get me starting on land banking. I've done that one a few or four times, right? So we won't even bother talking about that. But I know there are people out there, based on stuff that I read, whether it be in the press or on LinkedIn, that honestly think that the major house builders are operating in some sort of cartel. Whereas that could not be further than the truth. So, I remember my 10 years with the major house builders, always as a land guy, right? There is just so much competition because of the lack of supply. There is just so much, the imbalance of supply and demand, i.e. potential sites that you might get planning on or sites with planning, and the amount of people that want them, particularly the major house builders that have got to deliver growth and, they've told the city they're going to build 10,000 homes this year and then 12 next year or whatever it might be. It could not be further from the truth. That house building, in my experience, remember this was 25 plus years ago for me, but I'd be interested to see what you say more recently. It's literally so cutthroat in terms of like the competition. The last thing you're gonna be doing is doing them favours and working together. That's just not how it works, is it?
Yeah, absolutely on it. If anyone's listening in thinking, "Oh, good, we'll get the inside story of cartels and whatnot from an ex-house builder," no, the exact opposite. I mean, it was a highly, highly competitive business. It was dog eat dog to get land, and the CMA looked at that, took up many hundreds of hours of my life answering CMA questions and sitting before them. And they were quite clear that if development's not coming forward fast enough, it's because of the planning system, not because of house building behaviours. And my experience in Barratt, I was only in land, but it's quite senior, so I've got to see quite a few things. Was, if you bought a site, you were in big trouble if you didn't get it built and sold as quick as you said you were going to be building and selling it. And that group, we were always asking the questions. It's got to be quick. We've got to be in and out. We've got to get our money back as quick as possible. Land is the biggest expense. We've got to get that back. So if you're selling your site slower than you told us a group, and you're in a division, you're in trouble. Whereas if you're selling it fast in line with the budget, you're walking on water. So the idea that a house builder is going to spend all that money on land and then somehow slow pedal the return of its investment is, I've always found it completely nonsensical. And it was a good feeling that first day of reading that CMA report when you explain all that to them, and they kind of said, yeah, there is no incentive for you to spend £1 and not get it back as quick as he can, rather than just spend it and leave it there.
And it just winds me up when people, imply or assume that it's otherwise, again, which is really why, trying to get this understanding out there to people. So let's just jump on perhaps to the planning and infrastructure bill soon. To become an act by the looks of things.
Everyone's leaving now, Paul.
Yeah. Well, Alexa Culver, we did one on this about 5 months ago, actually, when some of the major changes to Part 3 were proposed, which was a good one, actually. So people should go back and watch that if they haven't seen it already. We're now, God, it's been painful. I've been following it all to some extent. We are now close, I think, to it all perhaps being rubber stamped. It's an interesting one for various reasons. Give us a little bit of an overview on what you think about where we are all now with it, and then I'll have plenty to sort of quiz you on.
Overall, it's hugely positive, and it's taken some. It's giving legal status for some things that really needed to happen. So it's a hugely positive bill, massively welcoming. I think I was talking to someone the other day, and I said, I'd put it in 3 buckets. I think there's some massive wins, and looking at, to me, the nature restoration, the levy, the environmental development plans, the new approach to environmental assessment, NDMPs, development corporations. There's some huge wins. There's some areas in the middle that are huge wins, but we're going to have to get more detail to quantify them. National development management policies, maybe national scheme of delegation. And then there's some other areas that, again, look like huge wins. But, I think we just got to be careful. And, probably look at maybe spatial development strategies and the impact of those as being a key one, given that is the sort of centerpiece of the bill. You're exactly right, Paul. We're in the final knock-ins. I think it's done its second read, been through the Commons, complete second reading of the Lords. They'll report. Government will respond and do its third reading in the Lords. Government will then enact, and hopefully, maybe the end of this year and early next, we'll have a bill. And people will snip and snipe at it, but overall, it's a much welcomed and hopefully positive change in legislation. If, like me, you want to see more houses built.
100%. Well, absolutely. I do want to see more houses built, but I also want to obviously protect the environment and nature, which I think has probably been one of the biggest areas of concern for a lot of people. Some of the stuff I'm a bit worried about, to be quite honest. What I think happened is, there were some major hold-ups on development, particular, water and nutrient neutrality being massive ones. Well, you just mentioned, actually, I think one of your mates effectively got wiped out by it, almost. Well, not almost, definitely. And I know lots of other developers did. I'm lucky for me, I wasn't operating in any of the areas that got affected by it, or when it started becoming a big problem, I just, like lots of developers, just avoided those places. If you knew you effectively weren't going to get planning permission, that's it. That's the end of house building and development there. You're just not going to go there. Why would you?
Yeah, but don't forget, Paul, some of these things, this was just dropped from outer space.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, consultation, just came bam from space, stop. So a lot of these guys they were building in a restraint-free area, and then all of a sudden they were building an area we can't build.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That's why I said, I was luckily enough for me, I just didn't happen to be in any of those areas, because if you were, you would, absolutely, you didn't get a choice. You're just carrying on as normal, trying to find sites, buy land, get planning, and all of a sudden this gets dropped on you. And you might be worth you explaining it, actually, Philip, because there'll be people out there that don't understand why it was and is not so much now, actually, because such a problem.
Well, 2 things. I wouldn't want to pretend to know as much about Part 3 as Alexa, and I wouldn't want to dwell too much on what happened. Was it now 3-4 years ago? But essentially, there was a ban on planning permissions in these areas until you could demonstrate that you would be able to mitigate your level of nutrient discharge into rivers before the development started. So it was incredibly difficult for anyone who had applications in the system, and it just came overnight virtually. There was a frustration that kind of long-standing planning concept that development may have some impacts in the short term, but the key thing is to make sure they are properly mitigated as quickly as possible in the long term. It seemed to be overridden with an approach of no impact ever at all, even if your mitigation is way in excess of that short-term impact. So that was a horrendous time. It was a horrendous time for Barratt divisions operating in those areas. Been a lot of progress since. Let's not underplay that. Tees Valley, I think, with a vanguard, the mayor up there just got people in a room, knocked heads together, and said, "We need a solution here, whereby developers can get cracking," because there's a lot of families not getting a house when they thought they were. But where we are now, I think, and I'm a huge supporter of the levy, because it definitely in theoretical terms, because it requires natural England to have a plan for nature restoration and improvement, and then set a levy from developers that delivers that plan. So it seems to me it's a definite net gain for nature in theoretical terms. The issue is how successful it will be, given that the National Audit Office have worries about the capacity of the Environment Agency and Natural England even before this idea was introduced. So we're going to have to see those organisations really beefed up to prepare the plans, set the levy, and then enforce it. There's no point having these plans and developers paying if nothing actually happens. We don't want to repeat some of the issues we've had with SIL. So I just worry. I'm a big supporter. I think it's much needed. I hugely applaud the government for what they've done. But are we going to see meaningful change in the next two years, given the complexity of it and the perhaps a lack of capacity in the key organisations, similar to the lack of planning capacity in planning authorities?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
No, Alexa's not so keen, and she has concerns about the level of impact. What are the terms? Cash to trash or whatever it is, I don't know. I've watched it reasonably closely, and I just think the levy is a great way to allow builders to get on building and contribute to overall major environmental improvements.
Well, it's a real tricky one, and I've got to tell you that it's probably one of my biggest concerns. Is there the capacity to actually manage it and implement it? And I can't see it, to be honest. I mean, it's very interesting. Coming back to the nitrate neutrality thing, just as an example for people out there that don't understand what that was all about. So, nitrates from sewage, let's call it, foul water from housing. The concern was that in certain areas, rivers and certain environments would be adversely affected by house building, right? Because you're potentially increasing you are increasing the volume of stuff that's got to go to the sort of sewage works. Whereas in actual fact, the vast majority of nitrates actually comes from farming, and so it wasn't really house building. Generates. I think it was something like 1 or 2%, right? But the bigger concern for me, and this relates to what we're talking about now, is the water industry. That ultimately it is their job to clean the stuff up and make sure that rivers and water courses aren't polluted. They have basically massively underinvested for years. I mean, you've only got to look at what's happened with the water companies. Absolutely off the scale, diabolical in terms of billions going out in terms of dividends, massive debts, whereas at the same time, no real investment in infrastructure. Now, if those many multi-millions, if not billions, had been spent in terms of, new reservoirs, new infrastructure, upgrading the system, then, this wouldn't have been the problem it became. So basically what ended up happening, in my opinion, is like the house building industry ended up getting punished for a problem that they didn't create and wasn't really their responsibility. And don't get me wrong, I'm not, house builders, it's not like house builders would go in pouring shit into rivers. That just doesn't happen. So, and my biggest concern about all of this is Ofwat and the Environment Agency that were meant to be managing the water companies. It obviously didn't happen. So for me now, the big worry is with Natural England and the EA again, or whoever it might be, is like, blimey, is this just going to be more of the same,
Well, look, Paul, as an ex-house builder, I'm going to agree with every single word of that. You know I am. The only thing I would add was there is a problem. We've all seen the green algae on rivers that used to, and estuaries. We'll know what it is because we've seen the problem. It's not good when you've got rivers. They're not getting any oxygen because of the level of algae on the surface. It's not good for the habitats below the surface. I guess just to add, the house builders were saying, yeah, but who should rectify that? Should it be the person who is putting, as you say, 1, 2, 3, 4% of the organic nutrient matter into the river, and that is via a sewage treatment works? With our foul sewage goes to a sewage treatment work, then there's a problem or a flood and materials released. That is it the house builder or is it other agencies who are actually charged with keeping those rivers clean? And I'm going to agree with you and say it really should be other organisations or the government addressing that problem, because none of us like to go out and walk and see rivers in that state. There is a problem. I think the nature restoration levy and environmental development plans, if done well, will massively help. And remember that it's business as usual. There's been a lot of progress on nutrient reality, but on environmental impacts as a whole, it's business as usual until that environmental development plan and the levy is in place. So there isn't a sort of interregnum period where, it's a free-for-all. It's no change until the plant, the EDP and the levy is in place and developers can pay into it. My worry is that might not happen for 2 or 3 years. What benefit we're going to get in the short term? Yeah,
agreed. And of course, the other worry is what will be the levy? How do you set it and still make or leave development viable? Because it's already unviable in lots of places.
100%. If I was a government, I might say, well, you're getting your development quicker, which is there's a return on capital benefit there. And if it's reasonable, and I imagine it'll have to be consulted upon, it should end up a payment no more onerous than what we have to pay to mitigate from day one. At the moment, I'm probably going a bit off topic. I think biodiversity net gain, I'm not saying it's perfect, but certainly from a Barratt perspective, we embraced it very, very early. It was tough, but we had fantastic internal people. And we've got our heads around what is a target-based approach to environmental mitigation, quantifying your impact and therefore quantifying your mitigation. And I think they just got to roll that kind of approach out more widely. And I think that is one of the big wins in the planning and infrastructure bill. It's signposting a move from that horrendously complex approach to environmental assessment. Essentially, what is your impact? What are your alternative places to do this development with less impact? And then what is your mitigation? And could your mitigation be less or more than over there? All that to a more of a process of environmental outcomes, which is what are we trying to achieve here environmentally in this area quantitatively? Will this scheme contribute positively or negatively? And if it's positively, we can go ahead. If it's negatively, we've got to go back and work out how we make sure it's positively. And that the way that quantitative approach to BNG, I think it already exists in social and economic impact. That's all about numbers. I think with that quantitative approach coming into BNG, I think that can be rolled out further. So we can just have a simple, is it negative? Yes, doesn't happen or it gets changed. Is it positive? Yeah, crack on. Because the current environmental assessment process, I prefer the new approach, cyclosically, put it that way.
Yeah. Okay, well, do you know what? It's very difficult when I do these things to be positive. It feels like it's all doom and gloom all the time. So, because it is difficult, right? How can we finish on a positive note, Philip? What can we say?
Look, we're going to have cost recovery on planning fees, and I know that, assuming it hopefully it'll be introduced in a way that doesn't hit SMEs hard. But the development sector, the volume development sector, have always said, look, we don't mind paying higher planning fees as long as we get a better service. That is being introduced. I think it's fantastic. And crucially, local authorities can ring fence that additional income to their planning departments. That is a major step forward. I hadn't realised, actually, in legislation, local government legislation, all income must go into the general fund under old legislation. So this is going to change that. And it's going to say that if we're going to charge more for planning, get more income, it can stay within planning. And I think that is fantastic. That's a great positive way to end, I think.
Yeah, it is. And just on that note, because it's a really important thing, actually, if I could wave a magic wand and change one thing, it would be to, properly resource local authority planning departments with the best people. Now, in an ideal world, I would actually make them paid more than the private sector, or at least the same, so it attracts the very, very best people and keeps them. Now, I realise that's not going to be easy, what with local authority wage structures and all that sort of stuff. But without a shadow of a doubt, that is massive, because obviously I think you were one many years ago. Being a local authority planning officer, it's not going to be easy, particularly bearing in mind things stuff have got so complex. As a developer, if you're a really good one and you want to find and do the best deals, you've got to understand and know about a lot of stuff. Likewise, really, if you're a local authority planner, I mean, the amount of reports and stuff that you now need to, understand that wasn't the case 10, 20, certainly 30 years ago. So it really isn't an easy job. So absolutely, the best people need to be attracted to that sector. Hopefully, some of these changes will help with that a bit,
If I was allowed 30 seconds more for two other positives. One is to agree with that. I did a secondment when I was at Lichfields in a local authority for about 2 years, part-time. And there's some phenomenally talented and hardworking people in local authorities. So I don't buy into this, local authorities this and local authority planners that. I think, it's a question of getting them led and inspired and motivated to do great work, because incredibly talented people. Two other quick positives. The national scheme of delegation will get less small schemes delayed by planning committees. We've got to see the detail. That is a huge positive. And then the national development management policies, if they're written boldly and positively, they could significantly de-risk schemes for SMEs if they're drafted correctly. So I think all to play for with those two, but the fact they're going to come is a great starting point to hopefully see something that will really help SMEs.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks a lot for being on, Philip.
My pleasure, Paul.
Next time, as soon as those national development management policies come out, actually, I'll get you back on and we'll have a chat about those, because that's going to be super interesting. Hopefully positive. Thanks again. If you're watching or listening, please do remember to like and subscribe. If you don't, you will not get notified about the next one, so you potentially going to be missing some good stuff. But most importantly, I really think we need to get the message out there to everyone. We want people watching this stuff, listening to this stuff, understanding all of the issues and the potential solutions, so we can end up working and collaborating together, everyone within the sector, planners, developers, big ones, small ones, architects, YIMBYs, NIMBYs, everyone involved. It's really important that we sort of get these messages far and wide. Thanks for tuning in to Inside Property Development. Please remember to like and subscribe. Do join us every week where we'll be speaking to house builders, developers, experts, planners and everyone involved in trying to get more much needed housing created the right way. We'll learn together how we can collaborate rather than fight, and by working together we can all help create better places, spaces and homes and a much more beautiful world.